Hello, and welcome to the Techstrong AI podcast. I'm Amanda Razani. I'm excited to be here today with Greg Whalen. He is the CTO of Prove AI. How are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Happy to have you on the show. Can you share a little bit about Prove AI and then some of your experience?
Yes, absolutely. So at Prove AI, our mission is to de-risk the development of AI, right? And specifically right now, we mean generative AI and LLMs, right? So the problem we're reacting to, that we're hearing from customers, right, is that there's a lot of organizations are just getting started with AI, right? Development. They're starting to figure out, okay, they built something useful. Now let's start putting this into production, right? Let's start using this thing, right? Like any other sort of software in the past, this raises questions, right? And since AI is a very different animal, AI development is a different animal than traditional software. What we're seeing is that the traditional approaches to risk management and to right the types of things you need to worry about when you deploy software are different, right? And they're starting to confuse people, and they're starting to put on the brakes, right? So at Prove AI, what our mission here is to say, let's not repeat the mistakes of the past, right? So when computing paradigms have changed and we found out more productive ways or faster ways to develop software, right? Let's not make the same mistakes and just continue ignore the problems, right? And then find out later on that, we're going to have to redo everything, right? We have to reinvestigate our approach to risk management and this, that, right? Because it just slows everything down. People get annoyed, and those who are better prepared for it will leapfrog and be able to be the market leaders, right? First in market. So, right, our software is specifically designed to help customers through those types of challenges by basically preparing themselves more long-term for doing AI development, at scale, which we think everybody's going to have to do, given the importance of it.
Absolutely. And I imagine, having to backtrack, not only is it a waste of time and energy, but probably a financial strain as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. So yes, there's immediate cost ROI here that comes down to time and productivity, right? So in addition to mitigating risks and things like that, right? Even if you sort of say, well, we don't know what the risks are yet because we're still so early in the journey. Yeah, that's true. But imagine the financial costs you're going to have by basically furloughing, many developers and introducing processes that worked for cloud development or Web 2 development that don't particularly work well for AI development, right? The costs are very big. By then you'll have teams of people working on this, probably relatively highly compensated teams, right? And basically by making it such that they can't spend every waking day developing software is lost money, right? And we think that there's returns by investing in this now, so you never have to get into that state to begin with.
So, from your experience working with different clients, what are some of the biggest risks or problems that you've seen them encounter? And what advice do you have to avoid those risks?
Yeah. So we think that the biggest risk or the biggest problem that we can solve at the high level, it's a business problem. It's not really a risk. It's understanding and communicating what our mutual obligations are between multiple departments or multiple parties. So it's the breakdown in communication between those multiple parties that's the biggest risk. So it's like I say that, for instance, let's take a very practical example around data assets and data usage, right? So me as a vendor, I have a solution. Maybe it's a great solution, and maybe it uses some sort of AI behind the scenes. Um, and maybe I want to be sure to somebody who buys the solution around what sort of data assets it's using right behind the scenes. So I want assurance that every time that you change something, you're going to guarantee to me that you're applying the same ethical standards, the same kind of legal standards that I need to make sure that I can keep using your software, because I don't know what sort of training data is actually being used behind the scenes for your solution, right? So a very practical problem. In the old world, right, we would have maybe just signed some sort of contract or something like that that says, hey, you're not going to do thing X that I don't want you to do. Or you would establish an SLA that establishes uptime and availability and error rates and establishes what we're going to do when we breach those types of things. The problem in today's world is that doesn't, or the problem in the AI world is that doesn't work particularly well anymore, right? Even because the sense of what's good and what's bad, or what you can do and what you can't do, is so blurry that unless you're really in the details, right, down to the level of exactly what data is being used, by whom, by where is the model running, then the whole discussion around mutual obligations is pointless to begin with, because it's impossible to write in just standard, right, contractual terms anymore. So like, the biggest, like, problem number one is simply expressing, right, what we actually expect of each other. And for Proof AI, right, we do this in the form of modules, software modules, right, that allow you to concisely and clearly in code, of course, right? So it still has to be translated to code. Like, let's get into the details of your data sets. Which data sets are we talking about? Which models are we talking about specifically? Who owns them? Right. And now let's track the events from those particular, from the systems that manage those. And let's talk about and define what's good and what's bad, right? What's acceptable, what's not acceptable. And when things start to go unacceptable, I want to be notified in real time as a customer that, hey, we're in a potential breach, so that we don't have to have a big complicated, discussion about it, right? Did we or did we not, right? It's simply this was the model we were talking about. These were the data sets we were talking about. This is what we said we would do on update. Are we doing those things? Are we not? Right? It's a much more practical discussion, right, to have than others. So I'll answer it that way, right? I think the biggest discussion is there's sort of this fear of, okay, I want to use this solution, but I really have no idea what it's doing behind the scenes. And then, okay, I want to address that problem, right? I want to have a discussion about it, but the discussion is unruly because it's so difficult to be specific, right? That's actually the first problem that we think is going to we'd like to solve, because that's what gets in the way of doing anything right now. It's just I'm a customer, I'm worried, I want assurances. I know what assurances I want at a high level. I don't know how to define it, and I don't know how to track it. So you can start there. That's one of the first problems to start with.
Absolutely. And so I know there's a lot of new regulations and AI laws. In fact, a few introduced by the EU. How do companies need to address and adhere to these new laws and regulations and stay on top of those?
Yep. So we think that, at least my personal take is somebody with a technical background here, right? So I don't have a compliance background, right? But of course, over the past many decades, right, having been through many compliance waves, right, I think that the best way to stay on top of things is to approach these things as, compliance is basically the bare minimum, right? So like whatever's going on in compliance is very, very much worth your time to look at today, right? Figure out, hey, if I had to comply with this tomorrow, could I? Because even if you don't, it's still a very good thought exercise, right, around where would I have to start? Because generally compliances are not, they don't fully tell you how to manage risk in your organization, right? They're very much a sort of baseline standard about, hey, let's be sensible. You should at least be doing these things, right? So in general, my take is that you don't want to be caught sideways in another year when you find out you have to comply with something, right? That's the way that people have often, said, oh, we don't need to worry about that ISO standard yet because it's not a law, right? So let's just wait. Okay, but then when something does happen, even if it's not ISO, it's something similar to an ISO standard, and then you probably would have saved yourself a lot of pain if you had just said, yeah, let's read the standard. And let's make sure we could roughly comply with it now, because that's going to probably be a pretty good, framework and platform to start with to actually manage risk in my AI. So, yeah, in summary, I think it's regardless of when they're going to become required or whether they're considered sufficient to transmit to other parties that, hey, I'm doing what's legally required. Even if that never happens, the point is, a lot of people started and a lot of smart people put a lot of thought into the AI ISO standards that really it's worth looking at and saying, maybe I should just start there, right? Maybe that's a good, starting place. And then let's build on it to figure out, like, what do I have to do extra to really manage, risk of AI development, either with my partners or internally. So still very much recommended that you start, looking at it as a baseline, just because, Where else are you going to get an output from many people who are very experienced in the field, telling you that, hey, this is probably a pretty common thing everybody should be doing, right? It's worth doing now, so you're not caught unaware in another year, right? And even if it's not law, somebody's going to ask you those same questions because they're very much a baseline, right? None of these things are outlandish, crazy things to do. They're very much a bare minimum in many cases, right? So why not start now?
I understand many business leaders have concern with budgets when it comes to integrating new AI tools to solve problems, and they're looking for that return on investment. So, what advice do you have for them?
Yeah, I guess, what you mean for like a compliance tool or actually just for an investment in AI?
Investment in AI or compliance tools, I'd like your opinion on it.
Sure, sure. So I mean, I think most of the investment at least from a compliance tool, right? We want to see that the investment is tied to the actual solution, right? So, right, that they believe enough in AI, that in their AI project, that they know exactly what they're going to, get out of it. So, like, if it's a relatively common customer support use case, right? We're talking about having a very clear idea that, we want, you know, we want to automate ticket response. We want to see, customer happiness increase. We want to see throughput, and we ultimately want to lower, cost of serving costs, right? The cost to serve the customers. I mean, that would be an example. So I don't. So I mean, the recommendation would be that, rather than thinking about investment in compliance as separate, I think it's absolutely necessary to just think about what is the actual, return on the AI thing that the AI embedded product that you're working on. So it's going to vary wildly by use case, right? Customer support is usually error rates decrease, right? Time to serve customers drops, right? Which is good, right? And the error rates lower, and overall lower labor costs, right? Decrease. For other things, let's take, the ad tech space, right? And targeting, right? Hey, targeting, micro segmentation gets even more precise, right? You get to, basically, the revenue per customer, revenue per person served, right, can increase and things like that, right? So it varies wildly, right? But usually you're talking about, in all of these cases, right, doing something more quickly than a human being could do. So typically, when you're talking about AIs, you're talking about doing a task that was traditionally assigned to a human, right? Was relatively slow, was a relatively, large pain point, right? And now you're going to eliminate that sort of manual review, not because the human was slow, it just wasn't a task that was scalable towards a human line of thought. So we're saying, we got software up to a point where it was automated. There was a manual check typically an AI of some sort is replacing, what used to fall back on people, right? So you can imagine the savings is always, better accuracy, at lower cost. So what, then the return, though, of a compliance tool like us is to say, okay, but there's a hidden cost here, right? So I think that's our big cautionary tale here to people deploying AI, is that, okay, yes, you're going to save this money if this AI performs well. Unlike a human, right? AIs don't always have, or AI agents, or whatever, they don't always have common sense, what we perceive as common sense, right? Which means that, you might have a very anomalous, unexpected error that has a huge blast radius, right? That's just like, whoa, like a human would have never made this error. So the AI may be like, wow, this thing is awesome. It really does, in fact, perform better than human review. It does a lot faster, but you're going to find these unexpected, untestable, undiscoverable, kind of instances where there's just a big problem. It's a high cost, right? High brand damage, right? It could be something as saying, of a poor refund handling or something like that, where, hey, there's an exploit, and suddenly your automated solution is starting to give out refunds that really would never have ever happened under human review, right? So there's monetary loss as well, and we've seen, actually, some of these things have actually already happened. Um, so we say, okay, well, then the return on investment of a compliance tool or of a risk management tool, de-risking AI, is to say, yeah, those things are going to happen, right? And right, we're going to prove return on our investment by saying that when they happen, the blast radius is going to be as minimal as possible. The downtime is going to be as minimal as possible. And this is going to be traceable, right? It's going to be very clear who messed up, right? So A lot of companies don't have that today. It's going to be a discussion. When something happens, and it will happen, it's going to be unexpectedly large in some cases, right? The impact is going to be, whoa, how did that happen? That's very damaging. And then it's going to be, who's at fault, right? How do we fix it, right? What actually happened and who's at fault? Without having something in place that actually tracked every single thing, every single prediction, and every single stage in the development across multiple organizations, right? Multiple data sets, multiple parties, then you're never going to be able to get to the bottom of that question, right? It's going to be a finger pointing match. It's going to be well, we need a couple of weeks to dig into the logs and then share logs with each other, right? Which is a very traditional software development process, right? There was an outage. I want a root cause analysis. I want an action list of what's, of how we can never repeat this again. It's not going to work very well with an AI model because there's no specific list of actions, right? Other than we need to review things manually that you're going to come up with. And we've already said earlier that that's the wrong approach, right? Because that doesn't scale either. So, right, that's what we think the return is. The return here is very much around managing those sort of big blast radius anomalies that are inevitable, going to come up, and then reducing the amount of time to resolution, reducing the amount of time and effort spent figuring out who did what, right? And then figuring out how we never happen again at a precise level, right? Where in the chain did this actually fail?
So a very helpful tool to have, especially as we see AI being utilized for so many more things and so many more automations.
Absolutely. Yes.
All right. Well, if there was one key takeaway you could leave our audience with today, what would that be?
Yeah. So going back to the beginning, the key takeaway, I think, is to get started with, de-risking now, right? So obviously that's a bit self-serving, as you can imagine, but I think it's been the right advice, to customers over the many waves of computing, right? It's as we started to do cloud development, as we did web development, right? Getting ahead of it is going to save your developers and your organization a massive headache by doing just a little bit now so that you're prepared when inevitably a customer asks for something, right? They say, all right, we need to have a risk discussion, right? Or a regulation is imposed and you have to go react to it. So, the recommendation here is you're going to need to move fast, right? Don't wait. Thinking about compliance and risk is actually pretty healthy for an organization now because it allows you to move faster, right? You don't have confusing discussions with leaders right? It forces them to start to get educated now, which is actually better, right? So to your earlier question about return on investment, right? It's probably net positive, right? Even if you don't have a lot of AIs now, because at least it brings everybody to the table to talk in a data-driven way about risks and about specifics of a model, potential pitfalls, right? In a way that really we've seen a lot of customers have challenges with.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your insights with us today.
Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
And thank you to our audience. Stay tuned. There's more.